So now we are ready to continue with our next keynote speaker, Professor Laust Mortensen. Thank you for being here with us from Denmark. So Laust Mortensen is Chief Advisor at Statistics Denmark, and he's also a professor at the University of Copenhagen.
Okay, so I wish I could have come to your place instead of sitting in my bedroom during lockdown here in Denmark. It's still not noon yet, but if you can see the light in the background, you can see that it's already fading. It's very dark and cold. I wish I could go south, but unfortunately...
There is a lockdown in Denmark?
There is a complete lockdown of public employees. And I think that's because we are kind of a token. So it's easy to send us home, but other people obviously go to work. Okay, so the previous talk was perhaps more on statistics than what I'm going to say. So I work at the Census Bureau, which is called Statistics Denmark, but basically we don't do a lot of statistics in any real sense of the word statistics. We collect data. So my talk is going to be about some of the new things that we've done during the epidemic. So traditionally we do the census of Denmark, and we've done that for several hundred years. And that's sort of, you know, the bread and butter of census bureaus, but it's also like a very slow moving process that looks pretty much the same year after year. We used to collect all this through questionnaires, through visiting individual households, but now basically everything is done electronically in Denmark. This is possible because for the last 50 years, we've had this unique ID that's issued to every citizen. And in reality, most countries have systems like this, but the unique thing about Denmark is that it's used for everything. So it's the same number you use when you go to the doctor. It's the same number you use when you pay your taxes. It's the number you use when you put your kids to school. It's the number you use when you want a new metro card or whatever. So it's the same number that indexes everything. And so all of the data that we collect, or most of it at least, are collected by taking administrative data that's been collected for something else, for tax collection or for giving me the right electricity bill, and then we collect that data and we reuse it for statistics. That's the basic way that we work at Statistics Denmark. Okay, so this is a picture from the day that the first shutdown was announced in Denmark. I was sort of half watching this on TV as it unfolded, and I didn't have the sound on my TV. But you know, in the background you can see that there is a person using sign language, and the second you see someone on TV using sign language, you know that it's really bad. And it turned out it is, because it was just complete shutdown of the country. And that's of course a good thing in the sense that it's part of managing the pandemic. So that's good. But if you're at the Statistical Bureau, it's also going to give you some new troubles. So one thing is that it immediately led to a demand that we started producing new statistics with relevance to monitoring the epidemic and data that can be used for modeling and forecasting what happens to the pandemic itself and what happens to the economy following the lockdown. So there's demand for entirely new statistics on the epidemic itself and on the economic effects of the epidemic. Then the other thing that also happened was that a lot of the existing pipelines starts to break down. So if you rely on, as we do, on reusing data that's collected for something else, and it's no longer collected, then you're kind of in trouble. And that also happened. Basically, we had to do a lot of things differently all of a sudden at Statistics Denmark, and we had to do it while in lockdown. So that was somewhat of a challenge. The way that we have approached it is to create a whole new series of statistics that's published on our homepage. Unfortunately in Danish, but who knows, maybe in English someday. And so this is a page that's solely dedicated to experimental statistics with relevance during the pandemic. And it contains a very long list of a lot of different statistics that we've really just created them during the pandemic to meet this new demand and to sort of patch up the different pipelines that were broken. And I want to give you a couple of examples of what we've done. So I guess one of the first things that we did was to speed up the production of mortality data. This was sort of a low-hanging fruit, so to speak, because we were producing these statistics already. We were just releasing them with a time lag of 3 months. But since all of the data comes from the civil registration system that's updating in real time, it was quite easy to speed up the production. It's easy for me to say it was easy because I didn't have to do it, but basically what needed to be done was to like iron out some procedures and make sure that all the SQL scripts were running correctly and so on. And then we could publish it much faster in basically the same quality as always. So that's the data you see reported here for Denmark. There isn't much to see. We had a very small bump in mortality, perhaps because of the lockdown, perhaps because we were just very lucky. And now I think the cumulative mortality for the year is actually a little bit below expected, because not only were we not hit by COVID, but also we don't have any flu, for example. And that, of course, lowers mortality. And I'm sure that you know this already. So this was the first thing we did. Very simple, just speeding up regular production. So one other thing that we did was to use a completely new data stream that we have had coming in for quite a while, but we haven't really used it for anything. And that's what we call smartmeter data on electricity. So in Denmark, by law, every household and company needs to have their electricity use monitored every 15 minutes. The whole idea is that this can be used to price electricity such that it costs more when it's expensive to produce. We rely heavily on things like windmills. I love windmills. They are great, except when the wind doesn't blow. So when the wind doesn't blow, electricity is actually expensive in Denmark. And the whole idea about these smart meters is to actually send the bill onto the consumer of the electricity such that the consumer might start consuming differently. So you'll only charge your electric car when the wind is blowing and so on. So we have all these smart meters. They report in all the time, billions and billions of data points. And we thought maybe we can use this for something. So what we did is we created a series of statistics on the behavior of companies and households during lockdown. So this panel here shows you the electricity consumption in 2019 and in 2020. for a bunch of different types of companies. So in the top left-hand corner, you have hairdressers and laundries and other service providers in that category. And what you can see is that all of a sudden their electricity consumption just drops dramatically. And the reason for that is, of course, that people like me don't go to the hairdresser anymore, and the hairdressers have to shut down, and you can actually see that in their electricity consumption. In the panel below, you have hotels and restaurants. You see the same drop. Public administration is below, so the lowest on the left-hand side. You also see this drop and then a pickup again. And we've done this for all businesses in Denmark. So there's a report that breaks this down into like, I think 55 different categories, and you can really see the impact of lockdown on the different types of businesses. We also did something similar for households. So this is the median household consumption by the hour across weekdays on the left and weekend on the right. There's a line for every week, and it's kind of a complex picture, but really what we saw as a consequence of the lockdown were that people started working at home, which means that they consume more electricity, obviously, during the day, such that weekdays in terms of electricity consumption starts to look a lot like weekends. And that's sort of course, obvious. When people can't go to work, they'll stay at home and use electricity there, but we can actually read this directly from the electricity consumption. We also looked at this in some more detail and broke the consumption into different patterns. So a night and morning pattern, a daytime pattern, an afternoon pattern, and a nighttime pattern. And the reason that we can sort of discover these different patterns is that they have very different electricity use signatures. So when you come home from work in the afternoon, what's the first thing you do? It's to turn on the oven and start cooking. And that has a very distinct signature. And the same is true for the things you do in the morning and the things you do once you're done cooking. So you can break it up into these different components. So then we took these components and we looked how they sort of reacted during the initial lockdown, and that's what you see here. And so I guess there are two takeaway messages from this. So one is that all the patterns become more volatile after the lockdown, and that's because some people have to stay at home and some don't. So you just have a different mixture. But what you see is that the daytime use goes up, and you actually also see that the evening consumption goes up and the morning consumption goes down. And the way that we interpret this is that not only are people working from home, that was obvious, but they're actually also shifting their activity patterns a little bit so that they are getting up later in the morning and staying up during night. And again, this is something that just can be inferred from simple data that's flowing to us anyway. So that was a fun project to run. So the third example that I've brought with me is the use of cell phone data to track how people are moving around. I was a little late into the previous presenter's presentation, but it's possible that you're using the same type of data in Cyprus. It's certainly very common throughout the whole of EU to use these types of data now, but we've also done it in Denmark. So basically what we did was we struck a deal with all the cell phone companies that operate networks. And we said to them, we'd like aggregated, non-GDPR sensitive data on how people move around. We're flexible to how you produce it and how you give it to us, as long as it's easy for you to do and as long as you think it's safe. So they then provided us with data on this. And from that, we created a series of statistics that can be used to monitor how people move between the municipalities in Copenhagen. Not in Copenhagen, in Denmark, obviously. So on the x-axis, you have the timeline, and then on the y-axis, you have the relative change in travel in Denmark. And so what you can see is that it's very clear when the lockdown occurs. You see this dramatic drop in mobility. And then you see a gradual return to normalcy. And if I continued the time axis here, you would have seen that we're actually quite close to the normal situation now. But when you break this down into regions, there are large differences, and that's because people travel very differently depending on where they live. So if you live on one of the outlying islands, your travel pattern is going to be very different compared to if you live in the capital region of Copenhagen, where people tend to commute very differently. Okay, so I think that it's safe to say that you should never spoil a good crisis. Even though this was a ton of work that we hadn't prepared for, it has actually meant that we are now able to produce statistics much, much faster and produce data for other people to use much, much faster. So there is all this transaction data that's updating all the time. The whole IoT area produces immense amounts of data that are not really used by statistical bureaus to the extent that they perhaps ought to. But I think we need to change that, and this pandemic has really shown us that it is possible to implement. I think that it's also safe to say that there's a lot of room for national or international collaboration. I think I've spent most of my time on these projects negotiating things like data access and data sharing, and we simply need to get better at that, because otherwise it's just too difficult to use the data for all the good things that we want to use data for. So that's something that needs more work. And then finally, I want to collaborate, or I want to acknowledge all my collaborators who have contributed to this. So this includes my colleagues at Statistics Denmark, but actually also a lot of academic institutions that have been kind enough to lend their expertise at very, very short notice to sort of get this running. So all in all, it's been really interesting part of my career, I'd say, and a lot of work, but also a lot of fun. So thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It really connects well with the message that we want to give, getting information fast, but also reliable data. And I wanted to tell you that we have a lot of attendees today from the Statistical Service of Cyprus, which is something equivalent, you could say, to Statistics Denmark. So I'm sure that they have found some of your ideas very interesting, and there might be room for collaboration, as you have said. Do we have any questions from the attendees? Okay, so I would like to thank everybody for, you have a question?
Haritini,
Yes.
Can I have a question for Professor Mortensen?
So Kostas Diamandouros
thank you,
is actually from the Cyprus Statistical Service.
Yes, thank you, Professor Mortensen, for the very interesting presentation. I would like to ask just one question concerning the cooperation with the mobile network operators. Was that did this cooperation initiated this year because of the pandemic, or there has been an agreement before the pandemic to get data, mobile data? Thank you.
Yeah, so like all other national statistical institutions, I think we've been trying to get hold of cell phone data for a long time, because we know that they can be used for many things. So our colleagues in Estonia, for example, have used it for tourism and for population counts and for many different things. So we've been trying to do that. The phone companies have been reluctant, and I think they've been reluctant for two reasons. So one is, of course, that they know that this is worth money, and they want to charge a fee for it. But perhaps more importantly, they are also very concerned about safety. They are really, really scared that something bad happens and they get a bad name and the customers are going to flee. So we only got this data because the institution that's responsible for the pandemic response said to the phone companies, we really, really need this data in order to inform our models and forecasts. So it's possible that once the epidemic is over, which I hope is soon, that we will no longer have access to this data. But at any rate, I think it's nice to have been able to collaborate with the phone companies so that you build some trust in that you can actually handle data in a way that's safe and do not, destroy their business somehow.